Hello and welcome to this module on resource acquisition. My name is Tanya. I'm a researcher in entrepreneurship at Lund University. Today we find ourselves at Mobile Heights Center at the Dion Science Park in Lund. Mobile Heights is an industry-driven networking community founded by Ericsson, Sony Mobile, Telia, the regional councils of South Sweden, and the universities of Lund, Malmö and Blekinge. Today, a large number of companies and organizations from multiple industries cooperate to boost the business within the area of connected technologies. We are here because it's a remarkable entrepreneurial community where startups and more established businesses in mobile industry benefit from each other's expertise. Reasons for this issue are manifold. Attaining and managing the resources in new and small firms is highly complex. Firstly, resources that new and small firms may need are rather low scale, which makes it less attractive for traditional resource providers, such as banks and venture capitalists, to get involved. This means that entrepreneurial firms often need to get creative with identifying and attaining their resources. Secondly, new and small firms often face internal organizational challenges in handling their resources in a sophisticated and systemic manner, as they might lack skills, manpower, and most crucial, yet most scarce resource, time. Therefore, it's reasonable to distinguish the resource acquisition in small entrepreneurial firms from that of larger, more established businesses. In this module, we will speak about what resources are, how are resources that new firms they require different from the resources in more mature firms, and where and how the resources may become available to entrepreneurs. While there is no single established definition, resources are commonly understood as a wide range of tangible and intangible assets that firms may require to perform their activities. It's customary to speak of the following resource categories: financial resources, like money on bank; physical resources, for example, premises, vehicles, equipment; human resources, including both the physical stuff, but also the individual's background and experiences; and social resources, that include the personal and professional networks and reputational resources such as goodwill. You may also find sources speaking of institutional resources, which are basically all the human, financial, technical, and other resources necessary to achieve the institutions or the firm's mission and goals. Vast variety of factors may contribute to whether a new firm makes a spectacular success or struggles for survival. Among such possible factors, research identifies access to resources as the critical one. As we have established earlier, new firms are different from large established organizations, and so their resource needs and ways to manage resources are specific as well. Indeed, for most new firms, an optimal set of resources evolves over time and changes significantly from startup to growth and maturity. In light of these dynamic changes, it's no surprise that new firms particularly value the intangible resources, such as, for example, knowledge and expertise, reputation, and business alliances. Such resources are not only more stable in face of dynamic development, but also they are often brought into the firm by individual entrepreneur and the team, and thus they often are the first kind of resources to be acquired. Let us now take a closer look into the possible reasons why it might be difficult for new firms to access the external resources. There exist various aspects to differentiation of new firm resources from resources that are used in larger and older organizations. One of the differentiating features of new firms is the strong interconnection between the firm and its owners and founders. Researchers agree that new firms often rely on their founders with their own human and social capital as a central asset. To gain access to those needed resources, new firms are often bound to rely on founders' own social network ties and personal and professional relationships. This close interrelation between the objectives of the firm and objectives of their individual owners, as well as reliance on the individual network of the founders, bears equally advantages and disadvantages. On one hand, the firm founders, the entrepreneurs, have more freedom in mixing personal and firm resources. For example, they may use personal savings and credit cards for business purposes, thereby having the possibility to promptly aid the possible cash flow problems. On the negative side, the firm founders and external resource providers may often perceive and value the firm very differently, because they simply do not possess and operate the same information regarding the firm. Such information asymmetry is often responsible for very limited access that new firm founders have to conventional financial resources, such as bank loans or equity investments from business angels and venture capitalists. There can be both internal and external reasons why resource challenges are particularly pronounced in new and small firms. Firstly, new firms may have difficulties in managing their resources in an efficient way due to disproportionately high costs associated with starting up, or so-called internal liability of newness. Indeed, new firm founders have to invest in learning the business peculiarities, establishing new formal structures, finding their ways around professional networks, recruiting and motivating talented staff, and performing other activities that are all costly and time-consuming. Secondly, new and small firms inevitably face external liabilities of newness, meaning they lack legitimacy in eyes of outside stakeholders, which is often critical for resource access. External liability of newness often has to do with the fact that firms that are young in age and small in size lack the established reputation and track record, and they are often associated with high risks. Recent studies conducted on extensive sample of Swedish firms show that as much as 40% of newly started businesses will be liquidated within the first 3 years. Considering such high insecurity and the earlier discussed information asymmetry, it's not surprised that the external resource providers, such as customers, potential partners, and banks and venture capitalists, are often hesitant to support the new firm. Now, consider that the market as such is also a place that is risky, dynamic, and highly competitive. In order to claim its place on the market, the new firm has to overcome both the internal and external liabilities of newness as promptly as possible, while keeping the costs of resource acquisition and management to the minimum. This means that some clever and resourceful logics and strategies might be required. We will next take a look at what resource logics are and how can the firms use some specific logics to overcome the challenges they inevitably face. There are different schools of thought that help us understand the resource acquisition and management behaviors. The first one is traditional management school, which is theoretically rooted in resource-based view and resource dependence theory. In resource-based view, organizations are seen as bundles of resources. Bundles of resources are defined as all tangible and intangible assets that are tied to the firm in a relatively permanent fashion. According to resource-based theory, resources can be combined or bundled up to generate unique features that would increase competitive advantage. Another managerial perspective, resource dependence theory, views the set of resources at a firm's possession or control as a tenet for firm's strategic and tactical management. By acquiring and controlling the resources, the firm attains the power over its competitors that might require the same or similar resource set. And thus, the firm is able to build and sustain the competitive advantage. The firm may also enter into strategic alliances with other firms to utilize the resources together, a phenomenon called in strategic management research as co-optation. Co-optation is one of the most flexible and easiest mechanisms for gaining access to resources, exchanging information, exercising influence, developing inter-firm commitments, avoiding conflicts, and establishing legitimacy. Research differentiates between at least two major types of resourcing through co-optation. The first type is co-optation for legitimacy, whereby alliances are built with more established market players, primarily in order to gain advantage through the common reputational and goodwill resources. The second major type of cooptation is co-opting underutilized goods, meaning that the firms in the alliance would share physical assets, human and social resources, whenever the needs might be common or complementary. The resource strategies, if they are undertaken well, should lead to increased survival and performance of the firm. In turn, such performance outcomes should influence which resources will next be identified, acquired or developed, as a means to extend growth or improve the fit in the dynamic environments. The process outlined here is visualized on a figure that you can now see in the video. Please take a moment to review and analyze the figure to understand how managerial resource logics approach might be useful in understanding the resource management in new firms. Both the traditional approaches, resource-based view and resource dependence theory, assume managerial rationality in resource acquisition. Presumably, the set of needed resources is well defined, it exists out there, and the firms compete with each other on the market for access and control over these resources. Entrepreneurs within managerial line of thought act as economically rational actors that select the resource acquisition and management techniques that are least costly and most accessible. Further, they may prioritize the resource acquisition techniques in a rational pecking order manner, whereby firms' internal resources and entrepreneurs' own resources are used first. When the internal resources are depleted, the external resources that are available for free or at low costs are used. Next in the pecking order line comes credit and debt, and finally, equity funding. Entrepreneurship research challenges these traditional managerial assumptions by emphasizing the importance of entrepreneurs' own individual abilities to creatively interpret their resources and approach their resource environments. For instance, entrepreneurs make judgments about which resources are more or less important based on their expectations about the future of the firm. Studies show that firms of different sizes and ages are characterized by different resource combinations. And as the new firm moves through the phases of development, it may become necessary to transform resources or get rid of negative resources to retain the right fit of resources to overall changes in the firm and its environment. Thus, shifts in the types and combination of resources are characteristic of the growth and development of new firms. So let us look at how entrepreneurship research may help us understand resource-related behavior. The first concept that should be mentioned here is effectuation. Effectuation theory was first developed by Sara Saraswati in early 2000s, and it's a broad concept describing entrepreneurial decision-making process that, in contrary to predominant goal-driven logic of traditional management theories, begins with general aspiration and then attempts to satisfy that aspiration using the resources at entrepreneurs' immediate disposal. Another research concept that is useful for our purpose is bricolage, defined as resourceful recombination of available means, particularly in situations where the environments are resource scarce. Bricolage is also a rather broad approach to decision-making that is action-oriented and explains how entrepreneurs may efficiently act in uncertain or resource-constrained environments. In entrepreneurship literature, bricolage has been used as a concept closely related to improvisation. Bricoleur, or the individual engaged in bricolage, does not plan and design the optimal path to the set aspiration, but instead looks around to find available means that could be recombined to achieve the purpose. Concept of bricolage, or in other words, making do with what is at hand, explained in many ways the behavior that may be observed in small firms that are able to create something from nothing by exploiting resources that other firms rejected or ignored. Finally, perhaps the most well-known entrepreneurial resourcing concept is financial bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is often theorized as a set of techniques directed at attaining the external resources and describes the process of satisfying the need for resources but by sole effort, with no or minimum external support. To get more insights, you may want to check out our other learning modules dedicated specifically to effectual decision-making and financial bootstrapping. Let us now sum up what we have learned today. Firms, equally new and established ones, require a lot of various tangible and intangible resources to perform their activities. New firms, however, are different from established businesses, both in terms of the kinds of resources they need, but also in possibilities to access and manage the resources. The central concepts for understanding these differences are information asymmetry and internal and external liabilities of newness. To overcome the liabilities, entrepreneurs may use resourceful strategies or resource logics, among which the particularly interesting ones are resource cooptation, effectual decision-making, bricolage behavior, and financial bootstrapping.